Hello, fellow automation enthusiasts, and welcome back to the PowerShell Collaboration Unleashed series where we're taking a deep dive into different ways that you can share and collaborate on PowerShell scripts with your team or really anyone you want. In this video, we'll be provisioning an Ubuntu server and preparing for the installation of the Littlest JupyterHub. The Littlest JupyterHub is a small standalone version of JupyterHub, a web-based application that allows you to create and share scripts via notebooks. For more on exactly what notebooks and JupyterHub are, you can watch a previous video in this series where I go into detail on that. A link to that will be in the description. In this video, we'll set up an Ubuntu 24.04 VM that we can remotely connect to using an SSH key pair. If you already know your way around Ubuntu and SSH, feel free to skip to the next video where we'll be performing the installation of the Littlest JupyterHub. But since not everybody is experienced with Ubuntu, I thought I would take this time to show you how to set up the server and connect to it via SSH. We'll start with installing Ubuntu on a Hyper-V virtual machine. Then I'll show you how you can set up SSH on a Windows 11 box so you can connect using a shared key instead of a password. Also, all commands and scripts from this video and the entire series will be available on my website and on GitHub. Links for those are in the description below. But without further ado, let's get automated. In this series, I'm using an Ubuntu Server 24.04, but you can use any version from 20.04 and higher. The VM itself is fairly standard. I'm going to create a Hyper-V virtual machine, but you can easily use VMware, Azure, AWS, or any other virtual host. Just make sure your VM has 30 gigabytes of disk space, 2 gigs of memory, and the ability to connect to the internet. Now for the Ubuntu install. Please note that I did edit and speed up some of the installation so you don't have to sit here and watch everything load and update. So if yours isn't running exactly the same, that's why. But we'll go ahead and we'll select our language. And we really just want to do a base server installation. So I'm going to give it a static IP address. Obviously the settings here will be dependent upon your environment. I do not have a proxy, but be sure to set one if you do. And we'll go ahead and tell it to use the entire disk. And then go ahead and give your server a name and then choose a username. You'll need to remember this username as it'll be the name that you're going to use when you connect via SSH. In my case, I'm just going to call it Ubuntu and give it a secure password. Now we do want to go ahead and install OpenSSH server now because it will allow us to connect to the machine via SSH once we're done installing. We'll skip any additional packages for now. Even though you may have seen an option in there to install PowerShell, we're actually going to skip that for right now because PowerShell is actually not required for running JupyterHub with PowerShell. But we'll get more to that into the next video. But for now, I just want a clean base image of Ubuntu with the OpenSSH server. And we'll let that finish installing. Oh, and that's the timer for my ribs. So if you'll excuse me, I'll be right back. Okay, ribs are done and resting, and it looks like our Ubuntu server has finished installing. So I'm gonna go ahead and reboot. Once you've rebooted, go ahead and log in to check and make sure that the username and password works. So now that we have base Ubuntu installed, we can get everything set up so that we can connect via SSH from our Windows device. Since we installed the OpenSSH server during the OS install process, the Ubuntu server is ready to go. We just need to generate a shared key, copy to the server, and test our connection. If you're running Windows 11 or have PowerShell 7 installed, you should already have SSH installed and enabled on your machine. If you're on Windows 10, you may have to install it yourself. A quick and easy way to check is by opening an elevated PowerShell prompt and running the Get Windows Capability commandlet to look for the OpenSSH client. We don't need the server component because that's for accepting inbound connections. The client is for making outbound connections. So your local machine only needs client and your remote machine needs the server. If the client is not installed, you can go ahead and run the Add Windows Capability commandlet to install that feature. So now that we've confirmed the SSH client is installed, we need to ensure that the agent is running and set to start automatically. The agent is what will store your private key that will allow you to connect to the remote server. We'll start with the get-service commandlet to get the SSH agent service, then pipe that to the set-service commandlet to set our startup type to automatic. And use the start-service to ensure that it is running. Now you can close the elevated command prompt and go back into a standard prompt. First, we're going to test that the SSH connection is working using the password method. Type the command SSH space your username, @ and the server name or IP. If this is your first time connecting, you may be prompted to accept the fingerprint. Then enter your password. You can see that we've successfully connected to the remote server. Go ahead and exit so your prompt returns to your local machine. Now it's time to generate a key pair for connecting to the remote server. The key pair consists of two files, the private key and the public key. The private key remains on your box and should be protected. And the public key gets copied to the remote server. When you attempt to connect, the private key and public key are compared to ensure that they match. If they do, you are authenticated. To generate the key pair, use the SSH keygen command. Give it a path, and I highly recommend setting a passphrase. This way, even if somebody gets a hold of your private key file, it won't do them any good without the passphrase. Next, use the SSH add command to add your private key to the SSH agent on your local machine. This prevents you from needing to point the SSH client to the key every time you connect. Now, before you can connect to the remote server, you need to copy the public key file to the remote server. We'll do that using the type command with the path to your public key. It's the file that ends in .pub. Then pipe that to the SSH command pointing to the remote server and run the simple command make dir-p ~ssh &touch ~h ssh authorized keys && cmod -r -go -cat ssh authorized keys. Okay. Maybe not so simple, but if you're like me, you want to know what something is doing before you run it. The first part, type, followed by the path of the public key, reads the contents of the local file, in this case, the tljh.pub. Next, the pipe SSH username @server pipes the output of the type command into an SSH command that logs into the remote machine as that user. And the next part defines the commands that will be executed on that remote server. Make directory -p ~.ssh will create the .ssh directory inside the user's home directory. The -p option ensures that no errors will be thrown if the directory already exists. The next two ampersands are used to chain the commands together, similar to the way a semicolon works in PowerShell. Then the touch SSH authorized keys creates or updates the timestamp of the authorized key file inside the SSH directory. This file is used to store public keys that are authorized for SSH access. Finally, the chmod changes the permissions of the SSH directory recursively, the -r, removing all permissions, read, write, and execute, for groups G and others O. This ensures that the SSH configuration is secure, as only the owner should have access to this directory. And finally, the cat command appends the contents of the piped public key to the authorized key file. This allows the public key to be used for authentication. And now you're all set to connect using SSH username @server name or the IP address. And this time it should connect straight away without prompting you for a password. And that wraps it up. Your Ubuntu server is now ready for the Littlest JupyterHub installation, which we'll dive into in the next video. And that video is already live, so you can go ahead and jump right in. Be sure to check the description for all of the commands used in this tutorial and other helpful resources. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more content like this. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions for future topics, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.